what I can mostly describe is just the most terror I have ever felt in my life. As I always remember watching those movies where somebody would get scared and they'd fall down. You're always sitting there shouting, get up, run away. Well, that was me. I literally fell over and I was moving backwards on my bed.
Friends and listeners, welcome to episode 2 of Hey That's Weird, the podcast where I feature your authentic and weird experiences. First, let me start by saying a huge thank you to the 48 of you that took the time to listen to the first episode. That's right, I checked the numbers. On a serious note, it means the world to me that people actually took 20 minutes out of their time to listen to my show. Thank you. This week, my guest is Brandon Wirthwein from rural Kentucky in the US. Brandon was cool enough to trust me, a stranger, when I posted on Reddit of all places, asking for people's weird stories and experiences. Brandon's stories creep me out. We talked for a while about his background and his family history of growing up in the small town of Cloverport. I decided to include these conversations as I think everything he said is relevant to his story. Without further ado, Brandon, let's get weird.
Hello everybody, my name's Brandon Wirthwein. I'm from a small town in Kentucky called Cloverport. Very rural, about 1,000 people, just a little more. I've always lived out here. I've been out and about, been to several different countries and places, and well, I could say I like it here the best probably out of most places. Although I would say out of my travels and things, I've never been anywhere that's quite as peculiar as here, to put it lightly. I'm still in college. I'm in my senior year, so I haven't had that much experience in going around and different things, but I have had one paranormal experience. But to understand it the best, probably would be to start with my grandmother and my grandparents. That's where it all seems to have started at. So this story starts with my grandparents. Now, there's something to be of note, is that my grandmother and her side of the family were very superstitious. I didn't really get to meet many of them and talk with a whole lot of them, but just from things that I've heard from my grandmother herself and my grandfather. Whereas on the other side of things, my grandpa, he is not very superstitious in the slightest. Now, some of this, I don't have all the details, they've been lost to time, and unfortunately with my grandmother, who passed when I was young, but she was able to tell me her part of the story and some of it, and I'll relay what I remember. Things seem to start with her and the house she grew up in. It was not far from where I live now, maybe about 30 minutes just across in the state of Indiana, and also a very small town, but slightly bigger. There, she grew up in a very large family and several brothers, sisters, and she always claimed that there were strange happenings in the house. Things like doors slamming, kitchen cabinets opening, stuff like that. I do believe she gave a reason for this, but I can't quite remember what it was. It was so long ago. But she got tired of it, and she married after she graduated high school, my grandpa, and they moved out. For a while, they basically lived in a trailer as they wanted to have their own place and save up enough money for a house. And this is when my mother was born. Nothing much happened there, and it was all good. It was several years later, maybe my mother was about a year old or so. They finally moved out to a place my mother called the Blue House, and everything was all fine at first. But after they did this, it turns out that my grandmother's childhood home was being demolished, and my grandmother couldn't stand the thought of it. So before it was, she went over and she took a plank off the porch. just to remember it. And then they took it back to the house. And after that is when things started getting strange. My mother, after she was old enough, said that she started noticing weird things happening in the house, the same sort of thing. Sinks would turn on, doors would slam, and cabinets would just open for no reason. She recounts one time, she told me when she was about 8 years old, that she walked into the kitchen and all the cabinet doors opened and closed simultaneously. And keep in mind, I should mention my mother is also not exactly superstitious. She would admit that things do exist beyond our comprehension, but she's never eager to jump on that. So after this event, she also said that she seen people staring at her through the windows when she would get home from school. And it got bad enough that she actually had night terrors for years after this. She believes that it was all from that house, that there was something to do with that house, that it was haunted, the one that got demolished way back. And they had a barn at the blue house, and there was a corn crib in the barn. And this is where that plank of wood laid. And Mom always said that Grandma forbade her from going anywhere near that, and that she even refused to look at the crib because that was just seemed to be what was causing all this. What was originally supposed to be something of nostalgia to remind her, it turned into something evil, basically. And it got so bad that eventually my grandmother begged my grandpa to basically throw out the piece of wood. And here's where the story kind of differs, because my grandfather says that he doesn't remember any of this and that he doesn't even really know what they're talking about. And my grandmother and mother claim that this happened and that he went out, he got the wood and he threw it away. They moved it away shortly afterwards and nothing happened after. It seemed to be all good. That whatever was the cause of this was coming from that old house that got destroyed so long ago. And the weird part is that during all this time, my grandpa claimed that he never seen anything weird happen in the house. And that my grandma and mother were basically just making up stuff. Whereas they, of course, both claimed to varying degrees the stuff that happened there. They eventually moved to where we live today, over in Cloverport, and I'm not sure is the exact reason why, but my grandmother for some reason was so scared that this house would have something bad happen to it, just like it happened before, that she had, I believe it was an Episcopal priest come and basically perform an exorcism and bless the house. And I didn't know this for the longest time until I went in my house one day and I found basically a paper that was on the inside of a cabinet, and it was some sort of Episcopal exorcism. It basically said that, like, devil, you're not allowed in this house and different stuff like that. I'm not exactly familiar with that kind of thing, but that's what happened. I was born about 2 years after they got the house, and I lived there basically all my life. It was for the longest time, I would say until I was about 12 or so. Things were relatively fine. I had a few strange instances in this house, but nothing I couldn't chalk up to just my imagination running wild as a child. Maybe seeing things in the dark, or for some reason certain places in the house I always felt like I was being watched and that there was just something off. This was about 2016, and it was basically the end of summer. I want to say it was late August or so, maybe even early September, as it was still hot. I remember specifically this night as I went into my room. It was about 8 o'clock or so, and I was waiting for my friends to get back because we'd all planned to get on Xbox that night and just play some games. But they went off and they were on a family trip or something, and they were going to be a little bit late. So I was basically just sitting there trying to waste time, do whatever, before they got there. And I didn't notice this at first, but for some reason, the night was really quiet. Like, there was sounds in the house, of the TV in the other room, but that was it. And this is strange, considering that there's always crickets, there's always frogs, especially summer outside. There's always something going on, always birds or owls, whatever it be. And like I said, I was not paying attention. I didn't notice this. And then that's when I heard some scraping outside my window. This wasn't out of the normal, as there was a tree growing next to the house that we cut down shortly after. And sometimes when it got windy, it would scrape up against the house. So I just basically played it off as like, oh, it was blowing against the house. But for some reason, that didn't sit right with me. Because last I'd remembered, it wasn't windy at all. It was actually quite muggy and humid outside. It was quite hot. So I played it off. I wasn't paying too much attention. And then the scraping happened again. And I was like, I do not remember it being this windy out. What's going on? So I looked over towards the window. And for some reason, the best way I can describe it is it just fascinated me. I just couldn't look away from the window for whatever reason. That's when the scratching picked up and I heard this sound. I could not describe to you what this sound was. I'm very familiar with living in the woods my entire life with the local animals and all the different sounds they make, whether it be a fox, a raccoon, or whatever. We don't have anything like bears or anything that big around here. So I heard this sound pick up, and it started off high pitched. It was very loud, and almost much like a woman screaming. And then for some reason, it like changed, and it got deep and guttural, more like a growl or a roar, and it picked up in volume. What I can mostly describe is just the most terror I have ever felt in my life. As I always remember watching those movies where somebody would get scared and they'd fall down. You're always sitting there shouting, get up, run away. Well, that was me. I literally fell over and I was moving backwards on my bed, just trying to get away from the window. The whole time I was stuck. I couldn't look away. I wanted to run, but for some reason I did not. My vision, basically, I swear, even darkened around the edges. And I was just so afraid, basically hyperventilating there. Eventually, it stopped after probably 5-10 seconds, somewhere around there. And I was absolutely terrified. I sat there for 10 minutes or so, just trying to gain my composure to, like, what just happened? What was that? So I got up and I went in the other rooms, and my mother and grandfather my grandpa was asleep and my mother was preparing for bed or doing whatever, and she wasn't acting like anything. I guess I just doubted that this had happened or anything like that, so I didn't say anything about it. It wasn't until the next day or several days later, I actually went up and asked them, hey, did you hear anything weird outside lately? And they both said no, they hadn't heard anything. And it freaked me out so much, I actually didn't dare go to that part of the house outside for maybe a week or so. And when I went over there, there was basically marks up against below my window. And I couldn't tell if it was from the tree or not. So I never said anything more about it, because somebody would come over and say, oh, that was just the tree rubbing up against the siding on your house. It wasn't nothing. The only thing to note of is that my window is more than 6 feet off the ground. So even if I was over there standing, I could not look into my window. And I didn't see anything out the window, of course, because it was night and I had the curtains pulled. After that, I didn't have anything that crazy happen again, but I always had weird, vivid dreams a few times that I couldn't make sense of. There was always certain parts of the house and different things. I always felt like I was being watched. It wasn't until just a few years ago I decided to look into Catholicism and basically going to church. Eventually, I did, I decided, this is what I'm going to do. And after I became Catholic, I never had anything weird happen like that. I said it kind of toned down after that instance, but I never really felt like I was being watched, or even the small little things that happened around the house. It didn't feel the same. So I took that basically as, maybe this is what I need to be doing, and left it there. That's basically most of my story. I know it's not very, riveting, exhilarating, but that's what happened, family haunting, and then lead to, I'm not really sure what it was outside, but whatever it was the most terrified I've ever been in my life.
Finally, I asked Brandon about the land on which his property is built. He happened to know the very dark history of his land and was kind enough to share. Just a slight content warning for some listeners. Brandon's recollection of his family's property's history includes descriptions of the murders of enslaved people, which some people may find disturbing.
My property does have a history, and there was a confirmed minimum of 3 people have been killed on my property. Some newspapers said it was a few more. It was like 6 or 4 or something like that. But the story I was always told is that it was 3. So my property way back, it was like a sharecropper's property. And before that, it was slaves. Basically, what had happened was our property's near like a river. And way down near the river, there was a little farm, a plantation. And basically, a slave had killed his owner and was then hung for basically doing that. And then after that, I'm not sure where this occurred on the property, but it was the same thing. I don't think it was the same family. And they had some people that lived there and some house slaves. And one day, the wife's jewelry went missing. And they thought it was one of the slaves and that they'd stole it. So they hung him for it out in what was then the town center, which was on my property back then, but since then is no longer. And then it turned out that it was actually the woman's son had stolen the jewelry.
I was really on the fence about including the dark history of Brandon's property in the show, but I think it's important now in today's world more than ever to acknowledge and highlight the extremely dark side of human nature and its abuse on human rights. I don't think these stories should be buried in history. As tragic and as cruel as they are, I think acknowledging the terrible things that happened and the awful people that carried them out helps in some way to prevent these things from happening again in the future. And that does it for episode 2. Huge thanks to Brandon for sharing his story, and a huge thanks to Brandon's family for giving their blessing for him to share it with me. If you have a story that you want to share and feature on the show, please reach out to me via Instagram via the tag @HeyThat'sWeirdPodcast, or via email at the address heythat'sweirdpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, stay weird. Hey That's Weird is written, performed, produced, and edited by me, Luke Frost. The original soundtrack is by Orhan Aydin. You can find more of his work at oayd.photo over on Instagram.